Is a campaign to remove Pierre Poilievre from leadership currently underway? Some of you might remember that it was only a few months ago during the leadership race for the Conservative Party of BC where I warned that there was a federal coup underway with Kory Teneycke. Now, Kory was the campaign manager for Caroline Elliott, and there were a lot of rumblings amongst her team that he was really out here in the West prepping a federal run against Pierre Poilievre using Jason Kenney. Now, here we are, post-leadership race. Kory and Caroline lost, Carrie Lynn Findlay won, and now Kory is on a podcast discussing with Jason Kenney a change in leadership for the Conservative Party. Watch this.
We're not lining up for a good outcome here right now, guys. Like it's and you know the time to alter course, I think, is now if we want to have a better outcome. And like there are lots of ways of doing it, but you know it's hard to imagine that being successful without at least a change in approach by the current leadership, if not a change in leadership. But you know, doing more of the same thing, I do not think is going to yield a better result.
You guys, that's as clear as we can make it. Kory is clearly prepping for a change in leadership amongst the Conservative Party. And this shouldn't really be a surprise to any of us. Kory many times has been on camera criticizing Pierre Poilievre and his leadership, including during the last federal election. You'll remember that he accused Pierre and his team of committing campaign malpractice because they blew a large lead. Well, honestly, we could apply that exact ideology directly to Kory for the way that he led the Caroline Elliott campaign. During the beginning of the campaign, they had a large lead, but then he made some horrendous decisions that ended up blowing the entire campaign for Caroline Elliott. So really, Kory is absolutely guilty of campaign malpractice. Now, who's he working with? Jason Kenney. Many of you will remember that it was Jason Kenney who was removed from leadership during COVID in Alberta because he was responsible for some of the most draconian policies in Canada relating to mandates. And in fact, it was in Alberta that some of you might remember that we had the arrests of pastors like James Coates, Tim Stevens, and many others. So they ended up removing Jason, and now here we see him working with Kory. Let's listen to what Jason has to say.
You know, what's happening on the right right now is a relatively new development. This kind of alt-right populism driven by social media, alt-right media, influenced by MAGA, and really put on steroids by the COVID experience. What we have now, though, this kind of stuff that you're referring to, I think is kind of sui generis. I think it came out, it was a new group of people who had never before been involved in politics, including reform. I think there were two things going on. One, righteous anger, particularly amongst younger voters, especially younger guys, who felt completely locked out of the economy and homeownership and just having a normal middle-class life. And plus, as I say, rage over COVID. But BC is a question mark, and Kory can speak to that based on his recent experience. But, you know, you have this kind of like, I think this young energy, that's the younger frustrated men, and a kind of post-COVID anti-establishment populism clashing with what's left of what's regarded as the old BC Liberal center-right establishment. We'll see how that all sorts out. But I really don't think this is about like a reform era takeover of the national conservative movement. I don't see it that way.
So here's what we have here, you guys. Very clearly, this panel, where we have Kory and Jason prepping their coup, is really exposing a much bigger play that's taking place not just in British Columbia, but across Canada. Jason in that clip is talking about how there's been a political shift with these people that he views as these alt-right extremists, people that didn't agree with all the COVID policies. And what we're going to hear for the rest of this clip is pretty much a criticism of anyone that had any problem with COVID mandates. They're going to make a big deal about the threat of young men. They're going to discuss the concerns over social media. And you know what I find very interesting? In that previous clip there, Jason Kenney is talking about how essentially this is MAGA conservatism, and he's really borrowing from the NDP dictionary. You know, isn't it always the left that will associate anything with common sense that's more on the right as being MAGA and Trumpism? These were the exact attacks that Mark Carney and the federal Liberals used in the last federal election. And it's interesting, you guys. Let's keep listening.
What role do you think Twitter and social media are playing in driving extreme views in politics?
Well, it's allowed people to find each other. These people may have all been around and had these views and had these different ideals, but now they can communicate with each other so much easier than they could have before. And that grows too. There's people who had no real ideological views who then get on these systems and then communicate with each other.
Are they really extreme views? And are they really a fringe minority set of views? Or is it possible that social media, through connection, has given people an awakening to the fact that they aren't as isolated as the establishment or the old political order, which really is just this panel of people? This is the representation of the old order. Is it possible that that old order has been doing everything possible to maintain power, utilizing tools like mainstream media, and now with the uprise of social media through connection and people just sharing their regular, ordinary voice, that we've started to realize, you know what? We're not alone. Our views aren't really extremist. Maybe they're far more common than we realize. And this is becoming a direct threat to the old order.
Just take a second and explain COVID. What do you think COVID did?
Broke a lot of brains.
I mean, it's just such a mystery to this whole thing. We don't talk about it as a society. Nobody talks about it. Nobody mentions it. It's like something that never even happened, but it appears to have broken us as a society in some way.
I think politically, there is a relatively small cohort of the population, single digits, who truly believe, like every suspicion, fear, or anxiety they had about institutions and elites, government generally, was for them manifest as a huge conspiracy, arbitrarily to usurp their rights and liberties and inflict upon them a dangerous experimental fake vaccine. And, I think it drove a lot of people down a rabbit hole of endless conspiracy thinking, and it drove a number of those people into political activism for the first time. Now, I don't want to say that this is the majority faction of the Conservative Party of Canada, but it is a faction.
Doesn't that language, just a small percentage, a small minority, doesn't that remind you guys of the words of our former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when he labeled anyone who struggled with the mandate policies as a, quote, small fringe minority with unaccepted views? This is the exact same language that Jason Kenney is using. And you know what I find interesting? The question itself was, what has COVID done? And you know what, you guys? I would align saying that I believe there was an agenda behind COVID, and maybe you don't agree with me, but here's what I would be clear on. I absolutely believe that if there was an agenda through COVID, that it has absolutely backfired on the political establishment. The reason being, even on this panel of old political order thinkers, they are viewing that there's this uprising of populism. They view it as extremism, young men with unacceptable perspectives. But you know what? It was, in a sense, COVID that really awoke this movement. And so at the end of the day, here's what I would say. If there was an agenda, which I clearly believe there was through COVID, I think it has backfired and started a fire here in Canada that won't be put out quickly. And in fact, this direction that we're going is a direct threat against men just like this.
I agree with everything you just said, Jason. I think that's all true. I think it's a virulent virus that has infected us from the United States in some ways. I think it's COVID. I think it's all of that. Thing that's happened with younger voters, particularly young men, I think is something that's worth spending a lot of time thinking about. As we saw some of that happen in the United States as well. We've seen that happen in other jurisdictions for all the reasons that Jason laid out. And if you're going to talk about, conservatism and what makes you a conservative, if you go back to Burke, it's a reaction to the French Revolution. It's not endorsing having a convoy of people lay siege to the Capitol and demand that the newly elected government step down. Like, that is the opposite pole of the fucking earth to conservatism. But, there it is. And it's that anger that Jason was talking about. And I think there's a demographic element to that. And then there's a COVID accelerant that was poured on top of it.
Here's what I want to say about that section. If you're a young man, or even a young woman, but especially if you're a young man watching this, I want you to recognize that you are a massive threat to the old political order. Perhaps one of the greatest threats in modern history. If young men become so disenfranchised, so sick and tired of the old order, that they actually start to stand and push back, they are a massive threat for change. And you'll know that when you look through history, that many movements for great change started with young men who were sick and tired of the way things were. And they actually started to stand and raise their voices. So here's what I'd like to say to each of you. We need to disregard all of the warnings of these old political order workers who view us as honestly a justified threat, and instead we need to harness this energy, work together, and we will win.
But this is a new populism. I mean, the populism of Tommy Douglas and of Ernst Manning, of the CCF and social credit, it was still a pretty genteel populism. It was standing up for the little guy against the powerful interests, for sure. You know, prairie farmers against Toronto banks, for example, or the railways, right? That's what it was. And now it is totally different. I mean, it is a populism, as Kory says, it's a Jacobin populism. The Jacobins were the most extreme people in the French Revolution, and it's a burn it all down populism. We don't trust any of the institutions. They're all corrupted. And I don't know how that attitude can function within a mainstream prospective governing party.
That fear that Jason is expressing is justified, and he should be afraid. Do you want to know how it will operate? It will overtake. Literally, it will be successful. And history is the best dictator that that's exactly what's going to happen here. Here in Canada, we have pushed things so far that we're at the point where, in a sense, we celebrate the perpetrator and then we penalize the victim. And then we look at our economic system where we're bringing in mass amounts of immigrants, but our own Canadian citizens are deeply suffering. We don't take care of our veterans, we don't take care of our homeless, we don't take care of our own, but instead we put our interests to the back and we elevate the interests of a small group of political operators and elites. And Jason Kenney and Kory should be very afraid, because here's the thing, we are not prepared to accept the old order any longer. Change is coming. Populism is rising. In fact, if you've been following me for any length of time, you'll remember that there have been several occasions where I've said that I align far more as a populist than I do as a conservative. And here's the reason. There are times where we need to ask this question: what is left to conserve? And honestly, where we're at here in Canada right now, there's not a lot left to conserve. And you know what we don't need? Scripted talking points, mushy middle perspectives, and no real change. The time has come where we are going to start working together and we are going to take real swings at real policies that make real impact for change, not in 10 years, but immediately. We are sick and tired of a government that has bogged us down with high taxes, endless bureaucracy, and policies that have zero common sense. So yes, we are a direct threat as populists, but we will win.
Yeah, but it is an echo chamber. And I think if you're on X or social media platforms, you get a very outsized view of what percentage of the population is, because it's 100% of your hate mail and 98% of the comments on X. It doesn't play that large in the actual, voting public.
How did that work out for you in the leadership race for the Conservative Party of British Columbia, Kory? You tried your old school ways here and it didn't work. We kicked your ass right back to the east. And you can stay back east, because you know what? Here in British Columbia, we sent you a clear message. We're not interested in your old school political tactics where you're trying to bring in a large lobbyist organization to bleed off government funding and to put forward the interests of your corporations. We're not interested in that. You can keep doing that with Doug Ford back east, but here in BC, we sent a clear message to you. You committed campaign malpractice. Your ways will not work here in British Columbia. And to be honest with you, I believe that this movement is going to become consistent across Canada. It's not you alone, but it's everything that you represent that we rejected. Caroline Elliott losing the leadership race for the Conservative Party of British Columbia had next to nothing to do with Caroline Elliott and everything to do with you and what you represent. And at this point, it is so clear that my warning that I gave months ago that you were prepping a federal coup against Pierre Poilievre by putting forward Jason Kenney is exactly what you intend. And here's what I'd like to say to you, Kory, and to you, Jason. Go right ahead. Just like you got your ass kicked in the Conservative Party of BC leadership race, you will lose and fall flat on your face far worse than what happened here in BC. You're trying to put forward a man who is one of the most hated political figures in the West, and you think that you have a chance? Good luck to you, Kory. We'll see you and look forward to facing you as an opponent because honestly, you were too easy here in BC, and we look forward to taking you on federally.